I never thought that an innocent toast in my own kitchen, in front of my daughter-in-law's smile, would be the beginning of such a calculated nightmare. That night my kitchen was spotless. I had the marble countertops polished and the pendant lights made every corner shine as if it were a stage. Jessica, my daughter-in-law of 5 years, moved with that studied grace that has always given me a bad feeling. "I'm going to take care of the champagne table," she said in a honeyed, almost singing voice. I nodded. What else was I going to do? She always seemed so willing, so convenient. As she pretended to check the canapes, I saw her discreetly open her purse and take out a small, almost imperceptible vial. Just a few drops straight into the glass with a small chip on the stem. My glass, the one I never wanted to throw away because it had history, the one I'd used at every celebration for the past 20 years. Jessica knew that. Then she smiled so sweetly. "So fake, this one's for you, my sweet," she said, holding out the glass. I took it without saying a word, and in that moment I knew. I couldn't explain it, but I knew. The way she wouldn't meet my gaze, that nervous tick at the corner of her lip. There was something rotten in that smile. I waited 5 minutes, walked around the living room, greeted some distant cousins, and then I found Helen, Jessica's mother, with a glass in her hand. "My glass." I feigned concern. "They changed your glass, Mrs. Helen. This is hers, isn't it?" I took it and gave her mine. Jessica was watching me from the opposite corner, her smile frozen. Helen drank. Not even 2 minutes had passed before she began to stagger. "Is she okay?" someone asked, but it was too late. She collapsed onto the new carpet, her mouth foaming, her eyes vacant, a scream, a silence of the kind that cuts the air. And in the midst of the chaos I turned my head to Jessica. It wasn't fear that I saw on her face. It was horror, but not for her mother. It was horror because the wrong cup had been emptied, because the poison had entered the body of the wrong person. She approached, trembling. "Mom, Mom." She cried, but her eyes, those treacherous eyes, searched mine, pleading, lost. I stood there, watching. I didn't say anything because at that moment I understood everything. That feigned sweetness, that sudden closeness since I sold my company wasn't concern, it was strategy. Jessica didn't want my affection, she wanted my millions. 3 weeks before that poisoned toast, my life was different. I finally felt free. After 40 years of effort, I sold my furniture company, the one I started in a garage with an old drill and a notebook full of ideas, for $9 million. I did it without fanfare, without a party. I just sat in my favorite chair with a chamomile tea and took my first breath in years. But Jessica noticed. Oh, of course she noticed. Suddenly she started showing up more often. "I brought you this cake you loved, sweetie. I helped you organize that family dinner." She even texted me at night. She just wanted to know how you were. She said it in that sweet voice she only used when she wanted something. At first I wanted to believe she was sincere. I thought, maybe she wants to get closer, maybe she finally sees me as family. Quote. But it wasn't long before the real reason came to light. One afternoon, while we were having coffee on the terrace, she threw the first stone, casually. "Sweetie, now that you have taxes to think about, you should consider delegating some decisions. A power share can help you streamline all that." Quote. I raised an eyebrow, but didn't say anything. I let her speak, let her feel safe. "We can do this together. You, Michael, and me, just in case you're tired one day. We don't want anyone taking advantage of you, do we?" I didn't answer her, just smiled, got up from the table, and picked up the cups. That night I locked myself in my study and began to review my accounts, my files, every important paper, because something told me with that instinct that only women who have been battered by life understand, that it wasn't about worry, it was greed. And it wasn't the first time. I remembered how a year ago she insisted that I give her my mother's pearl necklace. I wrapped it lovingly, just to see her show it off at a party as if it had been hers forever. Since then she always found ways to test my limits, but now she had a much bigger target, my fortune. And I had already made up my mind, I wasn't going to make it easy for her. Jessica has always had that look. Do you know that look in the eyes of someone who enters someone else's house and is already calculating how much each piece of furniture costs? That's how she looked at me, not at my face, at my jewelry, my curtains, my watch. The saddest thing of all is that my son Michael never saw it or didn't want to see it. Ever since they got married, she's been molding him like someone training a puppy with pats and treats, and he's happy to obey. Sometimes I think he was afraid to contradict her. Last year, with crocodile tears, he asked me to lend him the pearl necklace that had belonged to my mother. Just for the Christmas party. He said, "I'll give it back to you tomorrow, mother-in-law." He never returned, neither the necklace nor the gratitude. That was the first sign, but the last one was much more dangerous. A few days ago, when he came to visit me, he left his purse on the couch and went to the bathroom. I don't know what came over me, but I felt the need to check. I'd never done it before, but that afternoon I had a knot in my stomach like a warning. And there was a folded piece of paper with my signature at the bottom, only I'd never seen the document before. It was a list of expenses for care in my name: private nursing, therapy, a large amount at something called Sunset Home, a home for the elderly. She had already planned my exit, and to top it all off, at the bottom of that sheet, in her own handwriting, was a note. Full admission, $50,000. Urgent, urgent. As if it were booking a luxury vacation, as if my life could be rearranged with just a forged signature. That night I went to sleep with a tight throat. I didn't cry. I had no tears, only rage. The calm rage that doesn't scream, doesn't explode, the one that observes, writes, and waits. And when I saw what she tried to do with that glass of champagne, I knew for sure. Jessica was no longer playing at manipulating me. She wanted to eliminate me, but she made the worst mistake of all. Not realizing that I was already awake. Jessica thought I was a naive old woman, just another granny lost in pills and novels, but she didn't know the real sweet one. I had founded a furniture empire with my own hands, literally. I cut the first ones myself, with a borrowed saw and fear in my stomach. Every screw, every delivery to every client I served in those years shaped me. I learned that people can lie with words, but not with their eyes. That's why I knew she was lying, but I didn't yell, I didn't confront, I watched and I prepared myself. Since I sold my company, I had a complete security system installed in my house. Discrete cameras activated by movement. One pointed directly at the bar where Jessica dared to handle my glass. The camera doesn't blink, it doesn't let itself be fooled by sweet smiles. That night, when the guests left and Helen was still recovering with the paramedics, I locked myself in my study. I opened the recording panel and there it was. Jessica alone, taking the vial from her bag, looking around, pouring the drops into the glass with the chip. My glass. I saved the recording in 3 copies, a physical one, a digital one, and one more in the cloud with restricted access. Because if there's one thing I've learned in this life, it's that the truth needs proof, and I already had it. The next day I made an appointment with Thomas Gale, my trusted lawyer. We've known each other for 20 years. He was the one who reviewed my company's largest contracts and helped me with my husband's will. When I showed him the video, he didn't say anything for a few seconds, just took a deep breath and looked me straight in the eyes. "Honey, this is serious." "I know," I told him, "and I'm not going to let it go." I also handed him the document with my forged signature and the list of care expenses. He asked me to let him investigate the history of access to my accounts and any attempts to move money. I agreed without hesitation. Jessica thought she was going to manipulate an old lady, But she came across a woman who knows how to keep quiet and prepare storms. The next day I put on my favorite blue blouse and my jade necklace. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because a woman faces her battles with her head held high in dignity. Thomas Gale greeted me in his office with the respect that only comes with age. She didn't offer me coffee or a pat on the back, just her undivided attention, as it should be. I showed her everything, the video, the fake document, the list of household expenses Jessica had prepared. The sweet unblinking finally said, "This woman wanted to incapacitate you." We're talking about attempted fraud, financial manipulation, and if the toxicology test confirms what we suspect, attempted poisoning as well. I nodded without saying a word. I didn't need her to explain the danger to me. I was living it. I'm going to take care of the analysis of the cup and the liquid. We're going to document everything. I'm also going to check your bank account logins, your emails, any recent requests for digital signatures or power of attorney. If she's tried anything else, we'll find it. I didn't say it, but for the first time in a long time I felt protected, not by a man, not by a lawyer, by the certainty that I wasn't alone in this anymore, that someone believed me. Thomas checked the latest access logs to my account and there was an attempted transfer of $35,000 to an account called Sunrise Medical Fund. The sender was an IP registered to Jessica and Michael's home. Quote, "It's all here," Thomas said as he took notes. They tried to move the money before they had the power of attorney. They were in a hurry. Of course they were, because they knew they wouldn't have many more chances. "What's next?" I asked, my voice firm, although inside I was shaking a little. "The next thing is to protect your assets. Now. This very afternoon we're going to secure your accounts, create an irrevocable trust, and establish that only you have total control. Then, the legal part will come. But we're not going to rush. This isn't won by sweet talking, it's won by strategy." I smiled. Finally, someone spoke my language. Jessica had played with fire, and I had just lit the right fuse. I left Thomas' office with a clear plan in my head. I didn't just want to survive, no. That was too little for everything they had done to me. I planned to win. My goal was simple. Prevent Jessica from being able to declare that I was mentally incapacitated, prevent her from obtaining any legal or medical power of attorney over me. And of course, protect every penny of the $9 million I had earned through the sweat of my brow. Nothing less. The second goal was even more personal. I had to open my son Michael's eyes to the woman he had married. Not just for me, but for his own sake, because he was sleeping with a snake and because if it was me today, tomorrow it would be him or his daughter or anyone else with something she could squeeze out. Thomas moved quickly. That same day he drew up the documents to formalize a trust in my grandson's name with a legal administrator outside the family. Everything under my control until the day I decided otherwise. He also blocked any possibility of granting powers of attorney without my physical presence and a two-step identity verification. Nothing would pass my signature without my direct consent, not a single letter. In the meantime, my house became my fortress. I installed new cameras, changed the locks. The gardener came, the locksmith came, even the guy who helps me with the computer came to check every remote access. Jessica thought I was going to continue being that kind mother-in-law who pays without ask, the confused lady who signs papers without reading. But she forgot something. I didn't get to where I am by being stupid. I grew up negotiating with men who treated me like ornaments and I still won them over. I sold furniture to hotel chains in 5 countries. I opened stores, created jobs and now, at 69, I wasn't going to let a climber corner me in an asylum with a view of oblivion. That was my plan. And no one, not with little vials, not with fake smiles, not with stolen signatures, was going to derail me. A week later the lab results came in. I was sitting on the terrace with my steaming tea in my hands when Thomas called me. His voice was deeper than usual. Sweetie, what they found in the cup was digitalis, a highly dangerous cardiotoxic substance in concentrated doses. I closed my eyes for a second. I knew it, but hearing it out loud stirred something in my chest. It causes confusion, blurred vision, disorientation, he continued. In an elderly person, it could mimic symptoms of dementia convincingly enough to warrant a hospitalization. There was the whole plan. They didn't want to kill me outright. Not yet. Just make me look incapacitated. That way, with the power of attorney in their hands, they could move my money, sell my house, hide me behind white curtains while Jessica paraded around in my jewelry and Michael still didn't understand a thing. And the bottle? I asked. We're tracking the brand. It's not something you can get at any drugstore. This was purchased online with a private account. But we'll get there. I hung up the call and walked to the bar in the living room. I pulled out the bottle of champagne Jessica had insisted I save for the toast. I stared at it, the same bottle she'd brought with such enthusiasm, the same one she'd kept me from opening another. That was even the plan. I resealed the bottle with the cork and put it away like someone keeping a dead body on ice. Then I turned on my computer and pulled up the photos from the event. There was Jessica, smiling in the red dress he'd complimented so much on everyone, surrounded by my guests toasting with their glasses raised. But I could no longer see the beauty of the scene, I only saw the hidden intention behind each gesture. With those results in hand, Thomas could move in the big ones. It was no longer just about suspicions, it was evidence. And I intended to use it with all the elegance that the law allowed me. Jessica had prepared that toast to give me a silent farewell, but what she achieved was to give me the perfect reason to uncover everything and toast to my own victory. That night I opened the closet where I keep my bags, the brown one, the patent leather one and the navy blue one, the one that Jessica always left on the couch as if it were part of the decoration. She had still kept it since the party. She had left in such a hurry after her mother fainted that she had forgotten it. How convenient. With gloves on, because one no longer trusts even air. I opened it. Between cheap makeup and a pink diary with motivational phrases, I found what I was looking for, a sheet of paper folded in 3. When I unfolded it, the blow of rage was immediate. A printed spreadsheet with my name at the top, as if it were just another financial project. Care Plan Suite R, the heading read. Below, lines and lines of expenses, medication, psychological care, transportation, child support, and there in capital letters, total income to Sunset Home 350,000 Americans. She had even budgeted for the cost of the asylum, as if I were an old piece of furniture stored in an expensive warehouse. And worst of all, the signature at the end, a cheap imitation of my handwriting, the one we had already detected in other documents. The rage didn't make me tremble, it made me write it down. I took photos, scanned the document, added it to the justice folder, which was already starting to have more evidence than a crime novel. Jessica wasn't just greedy, she was methodical. She wanted to get me out of the way without a trace, but she made 2 mistakes. The first, underestimating my memory. How could I forget that I never signed that? The second, believing that no one else noticed, because Helen, her mother, was already starting to suspect. I could see it in the way she looked at me after the incident. How she lowered her voice when Jessica spoke, how she apologized with shame before leaving in the ambulance. I wasn't alone, and now, with each new piece of evidence, it became clearer to me how this web of lies was constructed. But I wasn't going to get caught up in it. That document was the final proof, not of her cruelty, but of her desperation. Jessica wasn't planning on taking care of me, she was planning on erasing me, and I was ready to face her with my best weapon. The truth, dressed up with evidence, was like someone had pressed a button. Overnight, the whispers began. At every family gathering, in every casual call, a phrase disguised as concern. Your mom forgot the neighbor's name. I've noticed she's been distracted lately. Have you noticed she's repeating the same stories? Jessica sowed doubts like someone throwing seeds into the wind, hoping they would germinate where they could do the most damage to my son Michael's mind. And the worst part is, it worked. One afternoon, she called me in that voice she used when I was a child and told me, "I'm sorry, but I'm sorry." Was asking for something I knew I shouldn't. "Mom, I was thinking. It's nothing urgent, but we should start talking about your long-term care. You know, just in case, Jessica is very worried about you." I swallowed the silence like poison. I wasn't going to argue. Not yet. "Sure, son, we'll talk about it soon." I didn't fight her, I just gave her a nod. Because I knew that in her world where everything Jessica said was sacred, I was already beginning to be seen as a developing problem. The sweet old lady who needed to be protected from herself. Every time they passed by the house, she would offer to pour me tea. She would hand it to me with a smile so thin that I could almost hear the words, "Soon you won't have to decide even this, old lady." I wouldn't let myself be provoked. I would feign distraction, mild forgetfulness. Just enough to let them down, because while they were talking about my supposed fragility, I already had a list of witnesses, recordings, documents, a lawyer, a plan. At each meeting, Jessica did her part, exaggerating my pauses, my gestures, even my silences. "Did you see?" She fell silent again. She was telling Michael as if she didn't know I was listening from the kitchen and he was silent. But not out of indifference, out of confusion. That was the most painful thing, seeing him doubt me, what he knew about his own mother, the love I had always given him. Jessica wanted him to see me as a hindrance, a burden, but what she didn't know was that I saw him as the reason why it was worth fighting. 2 days later, Thomas called me in a dry, direct, sweet tone. We found what we needed. The time had come to uncover more truths. Jessica had sent a formal request to the bank to transfer $350,000 to a supposed trust account for medical care. She used my full name, my customer number and a signature that was not mine. The forgery was crude, similar, yes, but not the same. Anyone who knows me knows that my signature has a curve at the end, a trait I developed since I learned to write with pen. This one looked like it had been taken from an old photocopy, crooked, shaky. And most tellingly, the request was sent from an IP registered to Jessica's office above her garage, the place where she spends her time working on her design projects while Michael takes care of the baby. She also requested digital access to manage your accounts, Thomas added, asking for the steps to change the ownership of your properties. All in less than a week. There it all was. The paperwork, the fake signature, the attempt to take over my accounts, the fabricated story about my mental health, a complete script worthy of a cheap novel that she intended to sell to the world as the truth. But she made another mistake, because we also found the application for admission to Sunset Manor, an expensive, remote private care facility with rooms that look like a hotel switch. She presented it as an urgent medical recommendation with a letter signed by a supposed doctor who does not exist in any official records. The forgery is obvious, Thomas told me. And it's not just a financial crime. This could be considered elder abuse, a federal crime. I was silent for a few seconds. My shoulders were heavy, but not from fear, from sadness, from knowing that I had gone this far. Jessica didn't want to help me. She wanted to silence me with a white coat and close windows, but it was too late for her, because what she signed with fake ink, I was going to erase with the law and there wouldn't be enough paper to cover what I had just unleashed. That same night, with the documents on the table and the silence of the house surrounding me like a heavy coat, I remembered something, a blue envelope kept at the back of the drawer where I keep important papers. I had saved it years ago when I still thought that Michael and Jessica were a young couple with a clean future. The document was simple, a preliminary trust, not activated, signed with legal advice. Its purpose was clear, to ensure that in the event of my death all my assets would pass directly to my grandson, not to his mother, not to Michael, and would be administered by an impartial third party. My hand shook as I pulled it out. I read it slowly. every line, every clause. I was surprised that I had forgotten it. Or maybe I had simply buried it because back then I still believed in the goodness of my people. But now, after seeing how far they could go, I understood that this document was my lifeline. The next day, Thomas and I reactivated it. All it took was a legal signature, immediate and unappealable. Everything I own, my house, my accounts, my shares, became part of that fideicomiso. I maintained control as long as I lived, but if anything were to happen to me, neither Jessica nor Michael would be able to touch a penny. Only my grandson, when he turned 25 and under the supervision of someone who does not carry my blood, but does carry my trust, I signed it with a strange serenity. It was not sadness, it was like closing a door, sealing a chapter. With this you are armored, Thomas told me. They can no longer touch you legally, not even with a court order. I nodded without saying a word because I knew that this was also the beginning of something bigger. Jessica thought she owned the game, but I had just moved the queen without him realizing it, and this time there was no way I could reverse the move. Outside, the wind stirred the leaves as if the world itself were celebrating in silence. I was no longer just an old woman defending her turf. I was a mother, a grandmother, a businesswoman, reclaiming the helm of her story, and no one was going to take it from me again. That afternoon I sat in the garden, on the same bench where Michael played as a child, making crowns with wildflowers. He was 5 years old and he told me that I was his queen. Now that same child, my son, was married to a woman who tried to poison me, who forged my signature, who planned to lock me up, and he was still by her side. No tear could wash away that pain. I cried, yes, not as a victim, but as a mother, because the cruelest part of this betrayal was not the legal or the money, it was looking back and seeing that perhaps at some point I had failed. I was too soft, too generous. I taught him to confuse love with obedience, but then I remembered all the times I was there, when he was sick as a child, when his heart was broken in college, when he didn't even have a deposit on his first apartment with Jessica and I was the one who put it up. I was always there, and yet he chose to doubt me. It didn't break me, it made me stronger, because in that pain I found my clarity. What was at stake was no longer just my wealth, it was my dignity, my right to grow old in peace, without being treated like a burden. So I wiped away my tears, took a deep breath, and looked up at the sky with my head held high. I wasn't going to beg, I wasn't going to plead for affection, because love that is demanded with humiliation is not love, it's dependency. That night I slept soundly for the first time in weeks, and when I woke up the plan was already set. Thomas would host a family meeting at my house with the excuse of talking about my will and financial planning. Michael and Jessica would be there, of course. So would Helen, who was already starting to see the truth, and a couple of surprise guests. A handwriting expert, a social services officer and a state attorney. All witnesses. All prepared. There would be no yelling, only truths. Because if Jessica thought she could bury me without me saying the last word, it was because she had never known what this woman was made of and she was about to find out. The following Tuesday, my living room looked like a carefully staged theater scene, every chair placed with precision. Fresh coffee, cookies on a tray, papers arranged neatly on the table. It seemed like a friendly gathering until you looked closely. Jessica arrived with her usual smile, disguised as concern. Michael followed her, more nervous than usual. Helen sat silently with her eyes downcast. She was no longer the complicit mother. She was the woman who had survived a toast that was not hers to give. Thomas greeted everyone politely and introduced the other guests, the social services officer, the handwriting expert and the state attorney. Jessica frowned. "Is this really necessary?" she asked in a honeyed voice. "I thought we were only going to talk about the candy wheel." "That's right," I said. "Finally. But before we talk about inheritances, there's something you all need to see." I pressed play on the TV. There was the video. Jessica pouring the liquid into my glass by herself, then looking around, pretending not to notice. The image was clear, there was no doubt. Michael tensed. Jessica paled. This is out of context. She tried to say, it's not what it seems. Thomas didn't give her any time. He pulled out the documents, the forged bank application, the fraudulent letter from the supposed doctor, the sheet with my forged signature. All this the prosecutor said as he spoke for the first time. It's enough to start an investigation for attempted poisoning, fraud, and elder abuse. Jessica tried to get up, but Helen spoke for the first time. You were going to kill me by mistake, she said quietly, looking at her daughter. Me? The silence was thick. For the first time, Jessica had no answer. Michael looked at me with tears in his eyes. I saw him break in that moment. I saw him see the truth and it hurt. Yes, but it was also liberating. I just wanted to help you, Jessica whispered. As if he knew there was no salvation. I didn't say anything else. It wasn't necessary, because in that room where she tried to weave her trap, she fell into the web that she wove with patience, truth, and dignity. Everyone was seated, but the air in the room was thick as lead. Jessica's smile was still broken, her eyes moving rapidly, searching for an invisible exit. Michael rubbed his hands nervously. Helen couldn't stop shaking and I just breathed calmly, steadily, as if I had been waiting for this moment for years. Let's continue, Thomas said in a calm voice. There's more. And then came the second blow. The handwriting expert stood up with a folder in his hand. He opened a page where my original signature was shown and then the forged ones on the documents Jessica had presented. The signature was copied in a rudimentary way, he said. It clearly doesn't belong to Mrs. Dulce. There are at least 5 indicators of forgery. Jessica tried to speak, but the prosecutor raised his hand. We're not finished yet. And then he pulled out the toxicology analysis. Digitalis, he read dryly, detected in the champagne glass, in a concentration high enough to cause disorientation, memory loss, and even arrhythmia in an elderly person. Substance introduced without the victim's knowledge or consent. Jessica stood up abruptly. It wasn't for her, she shouted, pointing to her mother. It was for Dulce. The silence that followed was so profound that the sound of a cup rattling on its saucer could be heard. Helen put her hand to her chest. Her voice was a whisper. Are you saying I was going to die by accident? Jessica realized her mistake. Too late. I didn't mean that. Michael looked at her as if he were seeing a stranger. You lied to me all this time. I did it for us, for our daughter, for her future, but no one was listening to her anymore. I stood up. Jessica, what you did is unspeakable, but it does have consequences, and I assure you that they will all come to you through legal channels. The prosecutor issued a preliminary investigation order. Helen, with tears in her eyes, signed the complaint for attempted murder. And I didn't move, I just watched as her world, the one she had tried to build with my silence, crumbled in front of everyone. There was no way to turn back now. The truth was laid bare on the table and no one had the courage to cover it up. The prosecutor unfolded the last documents. Quote, here are the digital access records to Mrs. Dulce's bank, he said. All from an IP corresponding to Jessica's office. And here is the transfer request for $350,000 signed with a forged signature. Michael was no longer crying. Now he just looked at Jessica as if he were trying to recognize her and couldn't, as if he were seeing for the first time the real face behind the makeup and manipulation. We also have, Thomas continued, the deleted messages from Jessica's cell phone recovered with forensic help. In them, she discusses with a contact yet to be identified how to manage the transfer of funds following a medical declaration of incapacity. Jessica opened her mouth, but no words came out, only a slight gasp, as if the air had betrayed her too. And finally, I added in a calm voice, "Here is the trust that I activated. All my assets are protected. Jessica, you and Michael are out forever." I took out the folder and dropped it on the table with the same care with which one drops a legal, irrevocable, unappealable judgment. Jessica did not know where to look. Helen, her lips pursed, looked at her with a mixture of pity and horror. "Why did you use me like this?" she said, her voice breaking. "I am your mother." Jessica just lowered her head. There was no more speech, no more story. The prosecutor signed the document formally initiating an investigation. A case is now open for attempted poisoning, forgery of documents, and financial abuse against an elderly person. Jessica paled. It was a mistake. She stammered. "I just wanted to help." I thought she was no longer in a position to. I stood up slowly. To decide for myself, right? To live, to continue to own what I had built. And looking her straight in the eyes, I said, "I am not confused, Jessica. You are. And now, finally, the law knew it too." The social services officer stood up, her expression as firm as it was compassionate. She had listened for hours without interrupting. Now with the evidence on the table, her voice was law. "We formally initiate an investigation for financial coercion and attempted fraudulent incapacitation," she stated. Mrs. Dulce retains full autonomy, and the living trust confirms the intention to protect herself legally. Jessica attempted a nervous smile, but it was too late for masks. Helen, sitting next to her, took a deep breath. "I'm going to press charges," she said quietly. "What you tried to do to me and Dulce is unforgivable." Jessica looked at her, astonished. "Mom, you don't understand. This was for our safety. For the future. And that's why you were going to accidentally kill me," Helen replied, on the verge of tears. "That's why you were going to lock Dulce away like she was an old piece of furniture." Michael said nothing. He didn't have to say anything. The weight of shame was noticeable even on his shoulders. I saw him swallow hard, like someone trying to choke on silence before admitting it. "Everything," the prosecutor, with the calm of someone who knows that the process is already underway, added. "Mrs. Dulce has already signed a formal statement. The funds are protected. The attempted fraudulent access is documented and the attempted intoxication with toxicological evidence and video. There is nothing left to do but move forward." Thomas closed the file, and in doing so it was like closing a chapter. Legally, Jessica and Michael are outside the will. They have no rights to any current or future assets. They will not be able to manage Mrs. Dulce's medical, financial, or personal decisions. I settled back in the armchair. I no longer needed to fight. The job was done. Jessica slumped into her chair. For the first time she understood that this was not a family argument, it was a social and legal sentence. And it was only the beginning. I looked at my grandson, who was playing silently in the hallway, oblivious to the drama, and I knew that all this effort had a purpose. Because if the future was his, I was not going to allow the present to be ridden by a betrayal. 3 days were enough for everything to fall apart. There was no need for a campaign. There was no scandal, just the truth, leaking out where it hurt the most. Her reputation. Jessica closed her social media accounts. First Facebook, then Instagram. The photos of fancy dinners, the fake toasts, the trips she bragged about using other people's money. It all disappeared as if it had never happened. But virtual silence wasn't enough to silence the whispers. At her daughter's private school, the administrators called Michael. "It's not personal," they said. "But given the circumstances, we think it's best to find another institution." They wanted to avoid the press, they wanted to avoid scandals because everyone already knew. Helen, brave enough, finally gave a brief interview to the local newspaper. Nothing sensationalist, just the truth. "I almost died because my daughter thought her mother-in-law's money was worth more than her blood," she said with misty eyes but a firm voice. That sentence became a headline, not because it was scandalous, but because it was painfully true. The calls started coming from old acquaintances, from friends who had previously avoided the subject, some offering support, others demanding explanations. Michael locked herself in her studio for days. Jessica, they say, stopped going out. She no longer went to the supermarket or the beauty salon, not even to the park with her daughter, because everyone was watching her, everyone knew, not because of gossip, or because of evidence, or because of her own confession. And from the tranquility of my home, I watched everything without resentment. I wasn't happy about her downfall, but I wasn't going to stop her either. I hadn't brought Jessica down, I had simply stopped supporting her, because her whole life had been sustained by a web of manipulation, appearances, and greed. And when that web broke, she fell under its own weight. Michael called me. Many times I didn't answer, because it wasn't about revenge, it was about setting boundaries where there had never been any. And now, finally, they knew that the kind old lady they wanted to lock up was not only lucid, she was more awake than ever. The morning Jessica was arrested, the sky was clear. Strange, isn't it? One expects storms when justice is on the way. But that day the sun was streaming through my window as if life itself wanted to give me a signal. No more fear. It was discreet. 2 officers, a warrant in hand, and not another word. Jessica didn't scream, just lowered her head and let them put the handcuffs on her. Maybe she knew that fighting was futile, that everything she had built on lies had become evidence. The charges were clear: attempted poisoning, forgery, financial fraud, and elder abuse. Heavy, serious charges, the kind that can't be erased with an apology or tears. Michael was named as an accomplice, not for acting directly, but for omission, for having ignored signals, for having given access to my documents, for having been, at best, conveniently blind. There was no scandal in the press, but there were rumors. The bank launched an internal audit. They wanted to know how someone could have initiated a transfer without full verification. The flaws were exposed. And with them the names. Sunset Manor, the luxury asylum where Jessica planned to lock me up, also issued a statement. They completely disassociated themselves, canceled any pending applications, and banned me from Jessica as a future client. Not out of ethics or reputation, because no one wants to be associated with such a dirty story. I, for my part, didn't lift a finger, didn't make any calls, didn't demand justice. I just let the truth speak. Because when a woman remains silent for too long, the truth becomes her best ally. And this time she spoke loudly and with signed documents. Jessica was behind bars. Michael faced a moral trial, but a legal one. And I was at peace, not out of revenge, out of dignity, because there is no greater punishment for someone like her than to see everything she tried to control slip through her fingers like water, and the woman she wanted to bury now walking taller than ever. Yeah,